The emotional side of a transaction is a roller coaster. There's ups and downs throughout the transaction. Again, thinking about the next evolution of your life. And if you don't have a really strong why or purpose, there's a high probability that you won't be able to pull the trigger.
Welcome to Advisor Talk with Frank LaRosa. Brought to you by Elite Consulting Partners, it's the only podcast offering unfiltered guidance and direct advice for all things concerning financial advisors, RIAs, and the practitioners in the wealth management business. Learn more and subscribe today at eliteconsultingpartners.com/podcast. And now, here's your host, Frank LaRosa.
Hey everybody, welcome to Advisor Talk with Frank LaRosa. I am your host, Frank LaRosa, and joined today by the Managing Director of Elite Advisor Successions, one of our subsidiary firms here at Elite Consulting Partners, Joe Greco. What's going on, Joe?
Nothing much, Frank. Great to be here, and excited to talk a little bit about selling your practice today.
Yeah, seems to be a hot topic lately. I should say lately, all the time, I guess. And all these stats about baby boomers and how many advisors are over the age of 65, et cetera, and all that's well and good, and it's true. I do think, though, advisors in the later years some of them aren't as eager to sell, and they struggle with some things when they sell their practice, which we're going to go over today, right? Some of the things. But so really today we're going to do sort of this is not really a hot mic, but it's sort of a fast and furious kind of thing. It's really like when do you sell, why do you sell, and how do you sort of plan this thing out, right? So basically like the when, why, and how of succession planning. And so the first one I wanted to really focus on is the when, right? How does an advisor, and how do you know when it's time for you to sell, right? It's time for you to exit stage left. You've had enough, you've done enough, you're ready to exit. And I see all sorts of, I see advisors that are never really ready, and they potentially, I hate to sound sort of, I don't know, morbid or whatever, but sort of die in their seat.
Right.
Figuratively and literally sometimes.
I've heard that before.
Right? Yeah, I've seen it. I happened to have somebody once years and years and years ago that happened to when I was at Prudential Securities. They actually thought he was sleeping at his desk, and he actually, wow, I think he had a heart attack and just died.
Wow.
But that's what he loved to do, and I guess he died doing what he loved to do. So,
right.
Not to sound morbid again, but anyway. But the when is really important, because if you don't know what your jumping point is, it makes it very hard for you to figure out what to do. And then, because when you back out, a lot of the other things we'll talk about is the how, right? And one of them is financial readiness and business readiness, right? So if you don't know when, you don't really know what you should be doing in terms of financial readiness and business readiness. So when you talk to sellers basically all week long, right? Every day, all week long, are there any common themes in your mind that sellers are have in terms of like, hey, I'm looking to sell because X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
At this stage of my life or whatever it is. Like, what are you seeing today as the reasons why? That's not why, but the reasons that advisors are choosing now or this time to sell their business.
Yep. Yeah. Great question. I guess unfortunately, I will say usually it's a triggering event. There's a health issue. I've seen compliance issues come into play before. I've also seen some advisors make decisions to retire based on technology. Sometimes their CRM changes or their systems changes internally at the broker-dealer or the RIA, and they feel like it's just time to take a step back because they don't want to learn those systems. Also, something that has become very common is their spouse retires. So usually when your spouse retires, it causes you to kind of assess your own personal financial plan. And usually what I found, when either the wife or the husband retires, usually they want the other spouse to follow suit soon after. So that has been a main driver, I think, recently for me.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. I missed that one. I can see technology. I think that's one of the reasons why we see a lot of small RIAs in particular selling and or rolling up into larger RIAs, because a lot of times these smaller sub $100 million RIAs that are state registered have been around for a long time, And it sort of made do with the technology that was, sort of off the shelf. Right. And in today's environment, it's become more and more important to have up-to-date modern technology, which is to some advisors in their late 60s, early 70s, maybe mid 70s. It's just not a game it's just not something that they want to do. They don't want to make the investment in a new piece of technology, which is going to cost them thousands and thousands of dollars. And then I guess it starts bringing up, I guess maybe this is the time for me to go. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of I guess a why and a when, right? Because you have to have a why. We've gone through some deals where, candidly, the seller backed out. Right. At the last minute. So can you talk about when you understand sort of like the emotional side of what you're doing, understanding the why is super important.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of advisors don't think about this until it's almost too far down the line. They need to understand, or you need to start thinking about, if you're looking to sell your practice, what is going to become your new hobby? I find a lot of times advisors, it starts out as work, you're building a business, but once you get to a certain point, you truly love what you're doing every day. Yeah. So it's hard to mentally disconnect and see themselves, hey, what am I doing for 40 hours a week now, right? I'm not going to the office anymore. I'm now home with my spouse. I've seen him more ever than I have. So I think it's definitely a fact-finding exercise and kind of I'm going to say come to Jesus moment, for lack of a better term, for advisors to really sit down and think about what their retirement is going to look like, right? They've helped hundreds of clients retire, but I've always found it an interesting paradox that they have a hard time planning their own retirement. So definitely causes
right. And I think that's why an advisor, you have to focus on the why, right? Why are you interested in selling your practice today? Because you don't, even though this is a podcast based on M&A and succession planning, right? You don't have to sell your business. There are solutions within the space that you can basically monetize to a degree and still own your at least the majority of your business, or if not all of the business, right? Set up a team around you so that maybe you can experience a little bit more freedom away from the running of the office, if that's what you want, right? Without fully jumping into the retirement, having to make that decision of not doing the thing that you love anymore. I think you make a great point that most advisors that are in that age group, that sort of 70-ish age group, for the most part, and if you're one of those people, this, the clients that you spend the most time with are probably now some of your closest friends. Right? And it depends on the chicken or the egg, which came first, right? They were a friend that became a client, or they were a client that became a good friend over 25 or 30 years, right? Or longer, right? And the thought of not being able to work with that client anymore, or talk to them about the business, about the markets and their accounts and all that other stuff, sometimes freaks people out. And so you have to understand why you're going through the transaction that you're going through and really focus on that, because the emotional side of a transaction is a roller coaster. There's ups and downs throughout the transaction. Again, thinking about the next evolution of your life. And if you don't have a really strong why or purpose, there's a high probability that you won't be able to pull the trigger. And so just understand that. And if that's something you don't want to do, that's okay. Like we have multiple facets to our company, and if you're just looking to, candidly, monetize, get paid, recapitalize, whatever you want to call it, the deals on a transition are bigger than they've ever been, right? So if that's something that you're interested in, then we can help you with that. Don't think that you have to sell your business because you're at an age where you need to sort of monetize your life's work. You can still do that to a degree without having to sell your business, right? But if you go down that road to sell your business, you need to understand all of the aspects of what you're going to be going through, right? And the next component of this, which is if you decide that you're going to go down that road, to your point, you can't get ready and then sell and then say, I'm going to sell my business in 60 days, right? There are things that you have to do. So we call those basically like financially ready, right? So financial readiness, right? And business readiness. We were talking about that before we started recording. Usually when you're talking about financial readiness, you should start 3 to 5 years ahead of time before you're thinking about making a move. Because when a buyer comes in and they ask for financial records, what they don't want to hear is, well, let me get some of that stuff together for you. It might take me a few weeks, right? There's a couple of messages that are in there, right? One, you're unorganized. You're unaware of what's going on with your business. 2, number 3, I would ask, like, well, what is it that you're going to be doing to your to the P&L that I should be aware of? What kind of games are you going to be playing over the next couple of weeks to jerry-rig your P&L to make it look more profitable, right? Versus someone that says, hey, what's your email address? I can send you over my P&L and my balance sheet for the last 5 years. Right? Within a few minutes. That person gets paid more money for their practice because every single buyer will have a level of confidence that that person has their arms around the business. It's profitable. Yes, there's business stuff in there that you pull out and you do all that stuff, right? Every buyer understands that. If you're a business owner, the benefit of being a business owner is you get to sort of use the P&L
to
your advantage, right? And so most buyers are smart buyers know how to back that stuff out to get to a true P&L. If you were, as the owner, if you were not involved in the business, that's how they get to a true P&L. But they want to see that the seller is ready. So when you talk to a seller and they're telling you they're interested, what are the common hiccups you see when you're asking them for their financials?
They have a hard time getting it. We just got past tax season, which was interesting, but a lot of selling advisors pushed it off until they got their taxes done for the year, right, to see the P&L. I would say make a phone call and get in there sooner than later, right? To your point, I think, you need to show that you're motivated to a buyer, that you actually want to sell your business. It can't be a reactive type of scenario where we're just continually going back to keep asking for things. I would draw an analogy to, being an advisor and sitting in front of a prospect, right? If you have 2 prospect meetings with someone who says they're interested, but they don't bring their statements from their current firm, you can't work with them, right? Because you need to be able to move that money to your firm. So try to think about that analogy. I think if you're really set on selling, you need to have a few years of tax returns, P&Ls, compensation statements from your broker-dealer or your RIA to actually show what the business is generating. That shows a buyer that you're ready to sell your business and you're interested in continuing the conversation with them.
Right, book information, right, asset breakdown, client distribution, how many big clients, medium-sized clients, small clients, what kind of products are you using? Are you all off-the-shelf annuities? Are you running the money yourself? We talked about that, right? Mm-hmm. Under business, really that comes under business readiness. But a buyer wants to see all of those things. And so if you're going to go down this road, spend a little bit of time and gather this information. It will pay dividends for you in the form of a higher multiple because a buyer will feel significantly more confident in paying up for your business. And then the other component of it is the business readiness, right? Again, there are some things that I hear this all the time. We talk to advisors like, well, I run my own money. I have great models. I run my own money, right? Well, congratulations. You actually just cost yourself money because that actually gets a discount on a multiple because a buyer cannot replicate what's in your head and how you run money. Yes, you can write it down. Yes, you can have, I guess, rules of the road, rules of engagement, how you run the money, your methodologies, right?
Sure.
But, someone of 40 years is going to look at the market differently than if somebody's taking over the business and they're in their 30s or 40, right? Or they're in their 40s, right? Mm-hmm. And so thinking about how is your business going to operate after you're gone is really, really important. And again, 3 to 5 years out, you have to start building and setting up your business 3 to 5 years out so that when you are ready to go 3 years later or 4 or 5 years later, the business isn't going to miss a beat because a large percentage of your deal is going to be based on a back-end component, right? Mm-hmm. Seller's note, performance bonuses of the business. And the last thing you want is you to lose clients because you're gone because the new person that came in to run the money basically isn't doing a good job. Right. So, and you don't want to just wholesale change over investment management to an SMA overnight. That takes time, and so that's why 3 to 5 years seems to work. Like, what is your exposure when you're talking to firms that are running their own money versus outsourcing their money? What are you seeing in terms of buyer interest?
Good question. So to your point, I think if the models are systematized and there's very clear processes and systems behind it, and not every client has their own little spin on something, I think that will still warrant a high multiple, and a buyer will be interested in that. Whether they outsource it to TAMPs in the future is yet to be seen. But as long as you have a process behind, I think, how you model your clients' investments, that's a positive. Now, if every client has something a little bit different, to your point before, that's not a scalable business process, right? So it's going to take a long time for the buyer to really get into the weeds and understand why this client owns Apple and why this client owns Google, right? For one simple analogy right there. So, to your point, I think the more turnkey and systematized the business is, the more buyers are going to be interested in it. The less systematized, the more messy it gets, and the more explaining we're going to have to do and documentation to really get that buyer open to buying that business.
Interesting. So when you go through these, and again, you deal with, dozens and dozens of sellers and on a monthly basis, what are the top common mistakes that you're seeing right now that sellers are making when they're engaging in this process and they're talking to buyers?
Good question. I think we hit it before, not coming to the table with data when you're ready. I think sellers need to understand that good buyers are pretty aggressive, right? Not in a bad way, but if they see data, you can get an offer on the table within a few weeks. So if you're not ready for that, I think you need to understand that this process moves as quick as you do. Usually the process isn't stalling because of the buyer, it's because of the seller, right? So I think you need to think about your own timeline as you go through the process to say, hey, even though we're starting conversations now, I'm not looking to sign anything for 6 months or so. I think that also helps set the stage with us at Elite Advisor Successions to be able to coach our buyer that we may need to move a little bit slower than originally thought. Other than that, I think, one of the things that we wanted to talk about today is just waiting too long. I think that's one of the things that a lot of advisors don't grasp is that, there is an actual time to sell your practice that's ideal. Right now, the markets are at all-time highs. Multiples are still at all-time highs. Who knows what the next 5 years are going to bring us. Right. So I think a lot of advisors wait too long. They forget that their clients age, right? As the clients get older, there's mortality risk, and there's also more money coming out of those retirement accounts every year, right? So the more that you wait, there's a potential that your practice could actually be less valuable in the future if all your clients are in their 70s. That's not a very attractive practice to sell.
Right. Yeah. The other thing I see when advisors decide to wait too long, you stop working as hard as you were working, 5 years earlier. And all of a sudden you start losing clients, or you start losing clients to a degree, but I also think you're losing opportunity, right? What I've found with some of the sellers that I've worked with is their lack of interest in actually having clients bring them new money and referrals, right? And whether they do it subtly or directly, I guess directly or indirectly, basically telling clients that I'm not open for new business. Don't refer me business. And so you're missing these huge opportunities because you're waiting too long and you're getting burned out. And your book is slowly leaking business. Mm-hmm. Right? That's what you don't see. It's like a slow leak. Because what happens is you lose a client, and maybe they weren't a huge client, and you're like, well, that's fine. They only paid me X amount of dollars. You start to justify why you're losing clients. And it's a shame because you spent your whole career building this business. You should get the very best deal you possibly can for the work that you put in. And waiting, we see a lot of times waiting, it just decreases the value. The other thing too is waiting till you're older. If you want to get a really good multiple, buyers want you to stick around for a little bit, right? And if you wait too long, and like some of the stuff that you're dealing with right now, with a couple of sellers, where there's a medical thing, right? Which you can't necessarily know that's coming, right? But they are older and they weren't going down this path, and now they're sort of having to do this sort of in a fire drill, right? Which is problematic because the valuations aren't going to be as big because you're not going to have as much time to stay around, especially in a couple of those cases, and be healthy doing it to make the transition of the clients from the old firm to the new firm successful, which ultimately affects the value of business, right? All of this is about how do you optimize the sale of your business, and it's a lot of these different things. And if you are exploring the idea of selling, or it's just a passing thought today, right? You owe it to yourself to at least explore what this might look like. I find that a lot of advisors are shocked when they hear how much their practice actually could be worth. And to many advisors, I'm thinking of a couple that I work with right now, the money that they're going to get by selling their practice is more than enough, substantially more than enough to live a long, fulfilled post-retirement, or retirement, not post-retirement. I guess it would be post-retirement.
Sure.
Post-retirement life. And so don't assume that you know what the value of your practice is. Pick up the phone. We're happy to make a phone call, have a conversation, and really just give you an idea of what the value of your practice might look like. And then, what you can do is really go through like an owner, sort of like an ownerness or seller, sort of a seller checklist to understand here are the things that you should, okay, fine, you're not looking to sell right now. Maybe you are in a couple of years. Based on the things that you're telling us, here are the things that we think you should be doing between now and then to create financial readiness and create business readiness, right? Which ultimately then drives value. So if you do those things, I think that'll be well worth your time. Joe, if they want to reach out to you, what number should they call?
Yep, absolutely. You can reach me directly at the office at area code 516-265-1410, or you can send me over an email at joseph@eliteconsultingpartners.com.
Awesome. And obviously you can email me at frank@eliteconsultingpartners.com. You can DM me on LinkedIn, or you can go to my Instagram account, which is frankLaRosa.elite, and you can DM me there. Happy to talk with you. Happy to get you in touch with Joe, and really just explore what selling your practice might look like. So with that said, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Advisor Talk with Frank LaRosa. If you're looking for more advice or solutions on any topics in the financial services industry, or you just want to subscribe to our podcast, head on over to eliteconsultingpartners.com/podcasts.